Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. This is Jeff with Fluent American checking in for, again, our Saturday live stream, which is every Saturday around this time. And today we're going to be talking about, trying to make the decision about if pronunciation classes, accent reduction classes are the right decision for you. This isn't just for English, of course. This is for any language that you're studying, but these are more based on my experiences as an English teacher and also as a language student. Um, and it's also kind of based on just some of the comments I've seen on some videos where, especially videos where we've done some analysis on other people's English and their speech. For instance, we've analyzed Hamid bin Hassan, we've analyzed Putin, we've analyzed, but also native speakers too, like Donald Trump. Just kind of like analyzing people's English. And for whatever reason, people get very defensive when you start analyzing pronunciation. I know my brother, for instance, was talking to some of his friends, and when he mentions that I'm an English teacher, but I also do accent training and accent reduction, some of his friends don't necessarily understand the purpose behind that. They think my goal is to change everybody's accent or to make sure everyone speaks a certain way, and obviously that's not the intention of accent training. So we're going to just kind of go into some of the thought processes that go into making this decision, for my students. When I have students and they decide, hey, I want to take pronunciation classes, what's leading them to kind of make that decision? So just to give some background for my students, my pronunciation students, they come from everywhere: Middle East, Asia, South America, everywhere. And of course, I'd also love to hear your own thoughts too. If you're watching this channel, I imagine you have some interest in accent and pronunciation, though you may or may not be taking classes of your own. So as I'm going through this, be sure to put some messages in the comments, questions, general concerns, also motivations for you. Why are you interested in pronunciation? Put them in the comments because I have the chat box up so I can take a look as we go through this. But again, so my students are coming from everywhere. Majority of my students for pronunciation are older, which I guess you may expect. So when I say older, I mean people 20s, 30s, and above. So adults. And some of them are living in, for instance, the US or Canada. Some of them are still located in their home countries. And I would say most, if not all, of my pronunciation students are already at a advanced level of English, meaning my guess is that they're at least level B2 on the European framework, which basically means they can have general conversations with relative ease. So it's not very often that I have people who are absolute beginners in English that also want to study pronunciation. That has some issues of its own that we can talk about in a future video. But yeah, so that's kind of the demographics for my students. And I think a lot of them, when it comes to why they're learning pronunciation or why they're interested in it, a lot of people started off with either job demands. So for instance, they took on a new contract with like an international client based in the US or something like that, or it may have been a request by their boss to study English more, or it could also be, again, that they're living in the US and they notice everyone in the US is speaking a certain way. They feel like they're not speaking that way themselves, so they want to make up for that. So that's, again, just some of the information about my students, why I think a large portion of them are studying pronunciation. There's also people too that are just really interested in accent pronunciation. They find it really interesting, and we'll talk about some of the other motivations for that too, as we go through this. Starting with communication, I think a lot of people, when they make the decision to study pronunciation, they're doing it because they feel like there's a disconnect in their communication between how they're speaking and how other people that they're talking to are speaking. And I think that sort of disconnect is creating this kind of like this personal desire to be like, hey, I want to stop feeling different. Another thing that I see students have a lot is, for instance, accent conveys a lot. It conveys, when people hear an accent, they change the way that they behave towards you. It's just a psychological thing, and it's not always positive. It's not always negative, but it is a difference. And for instance, it could be that my students are just tired of, when they talk to a native speaker, the native speaker asks them like, "Oh, where are you from?" or "What country are you from?" or things like that. And if they're living in the U.S., maybe they get tired of needing to answer that question, and so they think that, oh, by improving my pronunciation, people will start not wondering that sort of question, stop asking me it, because that type of question is very, I think, as a language learner, it's a tough question. It's a discouraging question when someone asks you where you're from, because they've identified that you don't belong or you're not part of the community. And having that separation after all the work you put in, you spent so much time learning any language to an advanced level, but people keep on telling you that you're not you're not perfect yet, right? You still, something about your language is still different, so you don't really seem like you belong here completely. That's what a question like, oh, like, where are you from, or making comments about your accent, like if someone says, oh, like, I love your accent, or things like that. On the surface, it's a very nice comment to hear, but if you kind of analyze it more, it's also saying that, oh, this accent is different than what I'm used to. This isn't normal for where I'm from. So that sort of othering, I think, in terms of communication, can really push a lot of my students to pursue these types of classes. And on the other hand, let's talk about the students, or not even students, the people who are language learners, but they feel like they don't need to study pronunciation. If you're living in a context where maybe you're not working with native speakers as much, or even if you are working with native speakers, it doesn't bother you when people make comments about accents, if they make those comments, or it doesn't bother you if you mispronounce words occasionally, or you don't have the correct rhythm or intonation or pronunciation. If those things don't bother you, and you still feel comfortable or confident in your language abilities, then maybe pronunciation classes aren't for you. The people I'm really working with are people who have these, and we'll talk more about this, but kind of have these issues with communication, or you're taking it just a little bit more personally when people are making those types of comments in general. So I think that's kind of the first thing to consider, is just communication. How comfortable are you in your communication? Do you feel like you're expressing yourself in a way that feels natural versus unnatural, and how much does that bother you if it's not natural? So that's probably the first thing I would say. Another factor for students in making this decision to study pronunciation or not study pronunciation is also kind of your goals with the language. I think a lot of people, when they start learning a language, they have this kind of dream of sounding like a native speaker, which I think is completely understandable. I get it, just in my own experience. It's just kind of like a personal goal you have. And so part of that goal, in addition to having, a wide vocabulary and great standard grammar, you may also put, a native sounding pronunciation onto that list. For others people, that's not really a goal. A goal for language for them may just be I just want to communicate in a language in a way that people understand me, and I can achieve my goals, for instance, whether that's just going to the store or ordering something or talking on the phone. I just want to achieve those goals. It doesn't matter to me, how exactly I sound, as long as I'm able to do what I need. And that's perfectly fine. If that's you, then, maybe pronunciation classes aren't for you. I think from a teacher's perspective, I think that I don't think a pronunciation teacher's goal is to, change every single student's pronunciation, or to make people lose their accent. I think accents are beautiful things. I think that they can be markers of where we're from, but that's not a bad thing. And that's what a lot of people, who are okay with their accents and things like that. That's one argument that I think is really strong, is that I like having this marker of where I'm from. Hey, what's up, Ibrahim? If you have some comments as we go through this, be sure to let me know. I think that's a big marker that, you take pride in where you're from. Like if you're from a country and you're speaking in another language that's, not native to that country or not as common in that country, people like that sense of pride. And I totally understand that. So, if you're a person like that who, it doesn't bother you. In fact, you take it as kind of like a source of pride and kind of showing where you're from in your speech, then that's great. I'm glad that you are comfortable in your way of communicating. That's great. That's ideally, that's where we want everyone to be, right? We want everyone to be comfortable in the way they speak. Unfortunately, not everyone feels that way. And for some people, again, it's going to be more important to sound more like the native speakers around them. And I totally understand that goal as well. So that's what I say about the personal goal. And again, if you guys have some thoughts on this, be sure to let me know as well. Also, things like misunderstandings. The reality is that pronunciation and also other aspects too, like intonation and stress. If you ask me, what's more important, pronunciation or intonation and rhythm, I would definitely say intonation and rhythm. That being said, you do need to be able to pronounce individual sounds. When I'm working with students, we always start with individual sounds first, especially vowel sounds, because English just emphasizes vowel sounds so much. We want to make sure your vowel sounds are super clear. But then once we get the individual sounds right, then we can move on to the more advanced stuff like intonation, like rhythm, like stress, because in communication, those things just carry a little bit more weight. That being said, if you're saying like an E sound instead of an I sound, like if you're saying seat instead of sit, or if you're saying Texas when you mean to say taxes, or things like that, obviously this can lead to misunderstandings in different contexts. So if you're feeling like you're pronouncing things and people aren't understanding what you're saying, then maybe, pronunciation classes should be something that you could look into. Ibrahim makes the note here. Depends on what we want, which is exactly, that's exactly what we're saying, right? It really does depend on your personal goals. If people are just using it for travel, or for instance, general English. So for instance, if you go to Europe, a lot of European countries besides the UK, the English that they use in Europe is kind of like a European English, or for instance, the English they use in India is like an Indian English. Every region kind of has its own peculiarities. For instance, another example, I have a cousin who went to Singapore. Singapore is a country where, Chinese and English are both the official languages, I believe. Like you can go into a restaurant and see the menu and everything's written in English. But she mentioned that, she had a really hard time because, again, everything's written in English, but then she would go to order something, but in the way that she would say things, it's just completely different than the way they would say things there. And she had a hard time understanding them, and they had a hard time understanding her. And, these types of situations are extremely common, so if you're working or traveling in North America, then obviously, having specifically an American accent is going to be more helpful, versus if you're doing most of your work in Europe, then the style is going to be just a little bit different. And this is also something that you see, for instance, in like conferences. For instance, a lot of people who've learned English, if you attend conferences and things like that, they'll tell you that if they go to conferences and most of the speakers are not native speakers, in general, it's much easier to understand their presentations. The trouble often comes when the native speakers, like the person from the US or the person from England, gives a presentation. Things become much more difficult for a lot of the participants, if English is not their first language. So a lot of times people who've learned English have an easier time understanding other people who learned English. And things like that is a super common occurrence. So again, going back to misunderstandings, if you're talking to people and you feel like your pronunciation of terms and words is leading to misunderstandings that are noticeable and are affecting your communication, then yeah, maybe it's a good idea to pursue some pronunciation classes. But even if those misunderstandings are occurring and they don't bother you, then maybe it's less important to study pronunciation. It kind of depends again on your circumstance. Ibrahim also makes a note here. So Ibrahim actually got to work abroad. That's great. And I think that's something that you see a lot too. You know, people in general who I think have more international experience tend to place a greater value on pronunciation in general, is kind of what I've seen from my students. You know, students who are living in the U.S. or students who have experience traveling in lots of other countries. In general, they seem to place a greater value on pronunciation than students who are spending most of their time in the country they're from, which makes sense. I think that's to be expected. You know, another aspect, and we've already kind of been talking about this indirectly, is confidence, and having pronunciation that you perceive to be more native-like can lead you to have a greater sense of confidence. You know, one thing that an exercise that I think is helpful is kind of like obviously recording yourself, but also kind of replaying older older recordings of yourself too. So, for instance, recording yourself today, and then maybe next year at this point playing back that recording, and then maybe a new recording of yourself the next year, and just kind of comparing the differences and things like that. And, you know, seeing the growth that you make between one year, like the previous year, and the current year, I think can help boost your confidence. Because especially like learning pronunciation is very slow. It does take time. It's just like, you know, it's like a consistent 5 to 10 minutes, you know, a day, every day for months or years. And you can always detect the changes that you make. But, you know, doing tools like this can be really helpful, I think, for boosting your confidence, so you can really start realizing, oh yeah, I am making a difference. And again, times where you're pronouncing things or saying things and people don't understand you, it can have an impact on your confidence. You know, if people are always asking you to repeat yourself, or if people are always having a hard time understanding a word that you're saying, you know, that I think those types of situations can really affect your confidence. Or if people make fun, I mean, worst case scenario, people are like actively making fun or teasing you for how you say things. Those are all can have an impact on your confidence. And again, if those types of situations don't bother you, then again, maybe pronunciation classes aren't for you. Maybe you're fine, and it's not something you need to pursue or you'd be interested in pursuing. We had the question here too. So, like, does reading out loud improve pronunciation? And I think that I'm actually making a video now on shadowing exercises, which will be out tomorrow. And I think when you're doing pronunciation, it's really key to have a model that you're using to compare yourself. So, does reading out loud improve your pronunciation? Yeah, I think it does. But I think if the goal is to try to, you know, not just improve your pronunciation, but improve your pronunciation efficiently, then I think you're going to want to find a model. So, for instance, find like if you're reading out loud, like an audiobook, or like the big thing I use with students is we look at conversations between native speakers and we find a transcript. So that way we can see the words that they use in the conversation. And so then when we listen to the conversation, we can also repeat on our own and then compare. So I really, what I would suggest, you know, don't just read out loud. If you have the resources, try to also find native speakers reading the same thing, and then recording yourself and comparing how you sound to how they sound. And this is something that you don't even necessarily need a teacher for. You know, there's lots of things you can do for pronunciation just on your own. This is an activity I really would encourage. So, to summarize, is it okay to read out loud to improve your pronunciation? Yeah, I think that's certainly better than doing nothing. If you want to take it a step further, though, try to find a native speaker that's also saying the same thing and compare how you sound to how they sound. That's something that I think would make the exercise even more effective for you. Because you start noticing things like the stresses more in the linking and the pronunciation of individual words. So those are just kind of the things that I was focusing on in our pronunciation. Just kind of like thinking about this and how like some people don't always understand, you know, accent training or accent reduction, or they hear that, or an accent coach, and they think like, oh, this person's horrible. He wants to change how everyone talks, right? And that's definitely not the goal. The goal is to make you feel more comfortable in your language. And, you know, again, if you're okay with your pronunciation, if you're okay with your accent, that's the end goal in any situation. You know, we want to get you to a point where you're feeling comfortable, and so if you're already there, then yeah, I don't think pronunciation classes would be a good fit for you. But if pronunciation is something that interests you, or it's something that you feel is leading to misunderstandings, or it's causing you to feel less confident in your own language ability, or if it's just something that you notice that you're making mistakes with, maybe pronunciation classes would be something that you would find informative, interesting, and also beneficial for improving your language ability. In terms of opportunities that we have for improving pronunciation, we have our Telegram group. So, for instance, every day I post a group of words, like a challenge to our group, and then you can record yourself saying those same words, and I provide feedback. I say, oh, that sounds great. Or I say things like, oh, the back of your tongue needs to be down more, or you need to have rounder lips, or the sides of your teeth and the sides of your tongue need to touch your top teeth, things like that, to kind of just guide your pronunciation. It's also helpful on Telegram too, because I mean, you have the files forever, right? So you can always replay my recordings and replay your recordings and compare. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, I definitely would encourage you to check out our pronunciation group. Other things too, if you're looking for pronunciation classes, you can also take a look, of course, at our website at just fluentamerican.com. And again, if you click the classes tab, you'll have the option to choose an actual class with me. But yeah, those are the tools that we have for improving pronunciation. Again, if you're looking at this at a different time than when we streamed, I'd love to get your thoughts on pronunciation, accent, pronunciation classes, things like that. If you've taken pronunciation classes before, let me know your experience. If you're also just looking for different types of pronunciation videos, let me know what types of videos would be most helpful for you. But yeah, that's pretty much what I had for you guys today. Ibrahim, thank you so much for joining us. I know we missed you the last couple times, so it's always great to see you again. I appreciate all your guys' time. Again, we have a video coming out tomorrow that's talking about shadowing. So if you have questions about shadowing, which is a technique that I think is super helpful for improving not only pronunciation, but intonation and stress, be on the lookout for that video as well. Thank you guys so much for your time. I will see you later. Have a good day. Have a good night. Have a good afternoon. Take care. Hey, take care, Ibrahim. Take care.